welcome to High Point, Brad.
Good morning. Thanks, Mark. It's
And it's
a pleasure to be here.
it's afternoon here, which is the pleasure of. I mean, I'm not correcting you, but there's quite a few guests who were in the mornings or in the evening. What I was the other way around. But beauty of Riverside, you can have a podcast recording with a really good quality and done online with anybody anywhere. I'm very happy, and I told you offline the first time we spoke, but I'll say that again. I'm very happy to have you on the podcast because, and I'll spoil it, Sketchup has been a massive life changer for me, well, career changer for me, because that's how I got into, modeling concert halls and theatres, and it made it so easy to do it, but obviously you still had to learn. So yeah, thank you very much for doing this, and that's how I became more specialist in concert hall and theatre design.
Thank you, Mark. That's, to be honest, in a nutshell, that's why I was motivated and curious about could I find a better way to present 3D modeling? Because for me personally, it was just this magical thing, the ability to kind of bring your designs and your ideas to life and to share those with others and to interact with it and visualize it. I mean, from my early stages of playing with 3D, I just thought, man, everybody needs to have access to this. It's just so cool. So
yeah, and it's very accessible as well.
Yeah, exactly. So honestly, that's been super satisfying. Very, very satisfying.
And obviously, I'm going to ask you more questions about how you created it and stuff like this, and when you sold it, how big was the team and how it was to have your startup at the time. But the interesting anecdote was that, again, the first time we spoke, you said, hang on, can you actually do acoustic modeling with SketchUp? And you didn't actually know that we could do this. Obviously, we create a model and we export it to our acoustic software. But yeah.
Yeah, in some ways it's no surprise, right? I mean, yeah, in some ways it's no surprise, but it was fun for me to hear that. It was fun to hear that, kind of like we were talking about this, kind of like how a lot of rendering applications, ray tracing and stuff, they're essentially shooting a light beam around and bouncing it off different surfaces, and then using the software to mimic what kind of happens in the real world. And of course, it makes perfect sense that sound is a very similar phenomenon. So yeah, that also has been incredibly fun for me. I remember telling our team, I said, you guys are going to be blown away with what people do with this. Because I wasn't speaking egotistically, I was just comparing it to my experiences with 3D. I still am. I mean, it's crazy. I shouldn't admit this. I am probably one of the worst SketchUp users there is, but I use it virtually every day. I sort of created my own monster in a way, Mark. I use it all the time.
I don't, I still obviously use it, but not to the intensity I used to use it before. So obviously, I was wondering, doing more research earlier on the evolution of SketchUp when it had the Ruby programming environment, which I used and was quite useful. And maybe we'll start from the beginning, and then we'll develop in detail, and I'll probably cut you out to stop some things. But how did you get to creating it? And why?
Yeah, I hopefully the story is not too dry, but believe it or not, a lot of times people think I'm some kind of creative type, like an architect or something. But I was a structural engineer, And I mean, I kind of pride myself on being, fairly creative. But so yeah, I was a structural engineer, and through kind of just chance, I ended up working for a brilliant guy. I was fairly young. His business was detailing precast concrete. So, as I'm sure most people know this that are listening, but precast concrete, you're essentially making all these three-dimensional parts, and then you take them out to a job site and hang them off a crane, and you put together this, giant three-dimensional puzzle. And of course, it's incredibly important that all these pieces fit together, and that they fit and align with the structure. And oftentimes that structure is even precast, right? So it's actually a very complex problem. And the way this problem had always been solved was you had, my oversimplified way of looking at it is you had very talented detailers that can create a 3D picture in their head in terms of what's going on. So in other words, they're going to draw, elevations and plan drawings of let's call it of the entire structure. And then what they're going to do is then they're going to draw drawings of every single piece. And so what happened was, I happened to have two really good friends, Claire Campbell and Dave Plunkett, who wonderful people, good friends of mine, and they were graphics programmers. And so I got really curious about, is there a way I had some ideas on how we could automate this process and potentially take out some of the inherent, I guess I would call it, problems or potential areas where you can have a lot of errors. And again, if you kind of think about the problem, the glue that holds that all together is kind of in the detailer's head, so to speak. Maybe that's a bad analogy, but we're going to run with it. So, any rate, I convinced Claire and Dave that this was a valid idea for a software product, and we did it. We formed this little company called CADZUX, and essentially the concept is so simple. I mean, it's almost embarrassing, but essentially what the operator would do is essentially make all these pieces and assemble them on a model, and then they would model the structure as well. And then you literally would fly around the structure and visually check it to make sure that things lined up, to make sure that embedded plates lined up, to make sure that it matched all the architectural features in the case of architectural concrete. And then we created a lot of tools that would enable you to, for instance, automatically dimension and generate drawings that would enable you to make wholesale changes. Like if, for instance, you want to take an entire floor and stretch it up 6 inches, or maybe move a reveal that went around the building, these kind of things. But essentially what we were doing, which is, of course, everybody now understands this, is that piece that's sitting in the building is actually a component. And then when that was all checked, what we would do is we would look at that component, or we would enable the user to set up a title block. And again, this was, at the time, this was like science fiction, because you could set up a title block and say, okay, I want a 3D view over here. I want the top view, front view, plan view. I want a materials list. Because again, the software is just looking at that part, showing it in different directions. We did some really neat stuff where it would automatically dimension it, and then it would populate the material list. So this was crazy. You'd create this model and then literally hit a button and go home and come back in the morning, and there'd be 400 piece drawings that had been generated and printed out. And that was complete science fiction at the time. And also even better is that if the model was right, everything downstream was right. So it was, at the time, I think it was generally considered that the piece drawings took something like 60% of the work in detailing a building. And we're talking about a massive amount of work. I mean, when I was doing consulting, it was not uncommon to be talking about, projects that were $300,000 to $600,000 detailing, even higher. So, tremendous amount of work and very error prone, because if some detail change in that model, it has to propagate through all those pieces, all those material lists, everything, right? So maybe that's a little bit long-winded way of saying we created this thing. And the reason I'm telling this story is what I learned is I could go to almost any precast company with management and give them a demo of this, and they literally would fall out of their chair. They could not believe it. And so it was incredibly easy to sell it. And a seat was $20,000. What we learned very quickly is they'd be inclined to put the detailer, the draftsman that had 30 years experience on it. Well, unfortunately, these guys were typically really terrible at 3D. A lot of them were still working on the boards or whatever. I mean, it was just, so the biggest impediment to our success was the operator. The software worked great. It was just, if you found somebody who was competent in 3D, they could absolutely kill it. So it got to the point where I'd ask companies like, okay, well, who are you going to put on it? And I'd give them my little lecture, and we're going to put, Joe on it, who's been doing this for 30 years. Like, I'm not going to sell you the software. It's just not going to be successful. So at any rate, what happened is a part of the, if you will, all the stuff that we created in that little company of ours. Dave and Claire are incredibly talented. We had some really creative, neat ideas because of that. And by the way, we built that on, I want to say it was AutoCAD 10. I think AutoCAD had just come out with 3D, and I think it was AutoCAD 10, and it had an API. And so we built this on top of that platform. Well, we got the attention of Autodesk because of some of the tools and stuff that we had created, some of the software. And they bought us, which for us, oh my gosh, Mark, it felt like we had just won the lottery. Here's the mothership, wanted these 3 Yahoos in Boulder, and it was super fun. I mean, the number was not very big, but to us, we felt like it was just some massive thing, and super exciting.
Sorry, how code heavy was it? Did that involve a lot of code? And did you also know how to code before? Were you very proficient, or you learned?
So that's a really good point. And I'll be the first to admit, and anybody that's ever worked with me will certainly chime in on this, that I am not very technical. In my defense, though, I've written code, and I understand the limitation. I understand, if you will, sort of the logic behind coding. So, I'm not the kind of guy in designing software that's going to come up with something that's just like science, just like bizarre, like, you can't do it. In that sense, and back in the day, I did some stuff in C. I actually wrote, kind of an extrusion tool in C and stuff, more or less just kind of for fun, but I am really not a programmer at all. My strength is more in, I guess you'd call it, the design side, in the concepts, and seeing a way potentially of how this could be made easier. So what happened is Autodesk bought us, which really, was for all of us, was really exciting. And then we worked for Autodesk, or I did, I forget, I want to say like a year or so. And nothing against Autodesk, really great people, good company, but the nature of big companies is that, I say this nicely, it's really hard to be innovative in a big company, with the layers of management and stuff. And, I've seen some things that were just like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me, in terms of how things operate, which actually really, really had an impact on me in terms of how you run a company. it was quite a fascinating education for me. And again, nothing against Autodesk. It's really just, I think, a byproduct of large companies and multiple layers of management and yada yada yada. So at any rate,
I'm smiling, but I'm not saying anything.
yeah.
But
So
kind of agree.
yeah. So I mean, the irony was the chief technical officer of Autodesk said, Brad, in large part, we're buying you because we want your ideas. We want you to cook up crazy stuff, right? And
sorry, Brad. Did they approach you, or did you seek to be bought? Did you have a big round of investors? Did you say, "Oh, we want to earn money from it now"?
No, I've never, with any of my companies, I've never sought out an acquisition ever, which I think is actually important. I think,
yeah, because now a lot of startups would be created to be sold out, and obviously the founders want to make money from it, or they will just raise fund, and the investors will want some cash out.
I could talk about that forever, but I think in the case of myself, yeah, of course, we're all human. The idea of making some money is great, but for me, a lot of times it was really just about wanting to make a living, but almost as important, it was just like, I have this idea. I want to see what happens with this idea. I want to bring this thing to life and see what happens. So that in large part was why, I started different companies, and
you still had control. Sorry, there's loads of things I'm wondering. You still had control, all the majority of the equity, or Autodesk completely bought you out?
In our little company with Dave and Claire and I, we were all equal owners, which I also felt was important. We were all equal owners, and Dave and Claire did the heavy lifting in terms of programming. They're really talented graphics programmers, and I guess you could say I kind of did everything else. I sort of did, if you will, the business side, the sales side, the documentation, basically everything else. And what happened was, in that case, Autodesk had asked if I would come out and just give them a little demo on the stuff we were doing. And I was like, yeah, sure. So, I went into this conference room, and I remember there was quite a few people that showed up, and I was kind of surprised. And I was just being really honest. Oh, here's stuff we're doing. And, I forget what I was even showing at the time, but, just showing the good stuff, showing the bad stuff, whatever. And I didn't really know the players at the time, but come to find out, the chief technical officer walked in later, who I didn't know who he was, right? And he was asking a bunch of good questions, and basically he said, hey, could you come by later? I want to talk to you. And basically just said, hey, I want to buy your company.
Simple as that.
Yeah. And it was funny because the number was so small. It shows you what a great businessman I am. We had an offer from a company in Denver, and I couldn't even tell you who they were. And I don't mind sharing the number. It wasn't that, by today's standards, there's nothing, right? But I think the offer that we had was like $400,000. I think this is right. Something close to that. And at any rate, so I'm sitting there in this meeting, and the guy says, well, I said, well, we have this offer on the table, and I suppose you'd have to move pretty quick if we were going to do this, because, we don't necessarily want to lose this offer. And he goes, well, I guess that would depend on the price. And so I'm thinking, well, Claire and Dave certainly aren't going to be bummed if I just double the price. So I'm thinking, oh, this is a ridiculous number. So I said like 800,000. He goes, well, that's a no-brainer. And so he called Carol. Carol Barth was the CEO at the time, and he's like, "Yeah, it's all good." So for us, that was super fun. It was just a really amazing validation to have what we thought was the you know, the industry leader that had interest in us. But so the takeaway from all of that, Mark, was it really got me thinking, you know what? Maybe the problem here is not the user. Maybe the problem here is the software, because see, my background was as an engineer. I had a lot of math, and so I understood all these 3D concepts. I understood coordinate systems and offsets, hand rules, and back in the early days of 3D, you actually would input like, I want to start a line at 0, 0, 0, and you'd say 0, 10, like literally you're putting in 3D coordinates back in the day. And so it really got me thinking about, is there a better way? Is there a way we could present this that maybe tries to get those concepts and the software out of the way? And so, I'm just enough of a ding-a-ling, or I got enough geek in me that I literally would be walking around going, okay, how would I model that? And I started getting this idea of, and this is the other thing that absolutely blows me away about designers and architects. It just is mind-boggling to me at how good you guys are at having a 3D vision in your head and putting it down on 2D paper, which is incredibly hard. Very complex thing to do. Yet every architect can just go nuts sketching out designs and concepts. So I was like, well, if they're so good at that, what if we sort of started where they can kind of draw out in 2D and maybe sort of pull that off the page? So that was some of the initial thoughts. So you start by sweeping out these shapes, and then you can sort of pull them up, and then maybe you can introduce more lines and shapes and sort of pull those out, or pull up a ridge, or in other words, what in my mind I was trying to do is emulate the feel of drawing with pencil and paper. Now, I know a lot of us, even me, would roll my eyes. It's not really like drawing with pencil and paper, but compared to like a 3D Solids modeler or AutoCAD at the time, or any CAD system at the time, yeah, it was like, comparatively, it was more like drawing. You could start anywhere. You could start in any sequence. If you drew a closed shape, a 2D planar shape, a triangle, rectangle, whatever, it would fill it in. It would mathematically put a surface on that. By the way, that had never been done. We patented that, which blew me away. That had never been done. Just that simple notion of you create a closed 2D shape and it will, let's see.
So was it done once you were Autodesk, or before or after?
No, what happened is I left Autodesk, or probably more accurately, I got laid off. Kind of, I've been sort of begging to be laid off.
So obviously it wasn't called Sketchup.
No. So what happened was, I'd been thinking about this for a while, and I had a kind of some notes, and I would just keep writing notes. Like right now I'm looking at a piece of furniture, and I'm like, okay, how would I do that? Oh, I draw a rectangle, I pull that out, And so I kept keeping notes in terms of what this thing, how it might work and what it might look like. Well, after a while, this guy, Joe Esch, who I'd have to say is just an absolutely brilliant graphics programmer. He's just off the chart. In our little company, CADZUX, to keep the boat afloat while we're trying to figure out how to sell this thing and everything else, we did consulting work for a company called Spatial Technology, which is based in Boulder. And Spatial created a solids modeling engine, which was used in a lot of big applications. And Joe was one of the hot shots there. And so we interacted with Joe a lot, and just, thought Joe was the bomb and loved Joe. So what happened was, fast forward, a couple of years, whatever, and Joe approached me, and basically Joe wanted to start a company. Joe's a little bit older than me. I don't know how much older, maybe 6, 7 years older. And he'd always worked for companies, and he really wanted to start a company, do something on his own. So I turned Joe onto some ideas that I knew of, and he came back like a month later and said, no, none of those really interested me, or they didn't pan out or whatever. And he said something like, you've got to have an idea. And I said, well, I do have an idea, but I've never told anybody about it. And it was just my own little sort of thing I was fiddling with. And he said, well, let's get together and talk about it. So we did. Not
even at Autodesk. Did you not pitch the idea at Autodesk? Or...
No, this is way after, or not way after, but it's after I left Autodesk. And so anyway, Joe and I got together, and I remember it was this little pizza place. We got a slice of pizza, and we're sitting there, and I'm showing Joe my notes, and Joe is, I'm saying this correctly. I think Joe is legally blind, so he has to have the notes right up near his eyes, and he says he's legally blind, but the guy's an amazing mountain bike rider. So I've never figured that out. But anyway, Joe's not a guy of a lot of words, and he's looking at my notes, and he'd flip the page, and he'd say, okay, so you're going to grab that. And and this goes on for a while, and this is how I remember it. Joe might contradict me, but, he puts the notes down and says, it's amazing. Never seen anything like it. Let's do it. Of course, I do kind of joke that he might have said that about anything just because he wanted to start a company, but I really, really did value his opinion. And he's like, no, it's fantastic. Let's do it. And so the funny part of this, I could go on forever about sort of the business side of things, but because Joe had never started a company and knew what was involved, especially raising money and so forth, come to find out he had another offer that was pending, and he had to let them know in like something ridiculous, like 3 or 4 days. And so he goes, hey, in all seriousness, because he didn't know, he said, hey, can you raise money, before, next Tuesday or something? And I felt this huge sense of relief because, I was like, oh, well, that's never going to happen. Because, I didn't really want to dive into another company at this point. Because I knew
Sorry, why not? Because, created Autodesk 5 years ago. And sometimes I'm thinking, when I ever stop and go back to being employed and maybe work for a big firm so I could bring all my knowledge. And it sounds like maybe you weren't able to bring your, I would maybe not enthusiasm, but your innovation to life. And so from there, maybe I would have thought you would have not wanted to be employed again and go back to innovating and creating things.
Well, there's no question about that. You hit the nail on the head. I'm probably going to jinx myself if I ever need a job, but I have worked for myself since I was pretty young. I forget. I want to say 24 or 25. I think that's right. At any rate, what I have learned is that it's impossible for me to really work for somebody else. So really what I was saying when I said that comment about didn't really want to start another company, it was more like, I think it was just more a little bit of like, oh God, here we go again. It wasn't that I wasn't excited about the idea, but it was just like, I know what's involved, and it's fun too. Don't get me wrong. Right. I just know there's a fair bit of work. But thank goodness we did it. So the fun thing is I literally came home from that lunch and I called a guy that I had got to know because, I got to know this guy. His name's Raleigh Rawls, a wonderful man. He's a friend of mine now. Raleigh wanted to buy a piece of property that I owned. And in doing that, we got to know each other. And I knew Rawls is a very successful guy, does a lot of investing in startups and stuff. And I called him. And literally the conversation, in my mind, that conversation couldn't have been more than 5 minutes long. And I basically said, hey, I've got this idea and trying to raise, I think it's got some merit. I think it might actually work. And, we just need a little money to get Joe down the road, like 6 months, and, so like maybe $60,000 or something like that. And literally he said, we talked a little bit about what, give him in exchange. And he's like, yeah, like, where do you want the check? That was it. Like literally a 5-minute conversation and had raised the seed money. And then my old business partner, Claire, and her now husband, they wanted to know what was going on, and they ended up putting some money in as well. So we raised a little bit of money, and man, we were off to the races.
It sounds like it was so easy to raise money at the time when we obviously it's much more complicated to raise an investment now. There's so much due diligence done by the investors, and you have to show your numbers, and they have to know you, they have to get the details of the idea, how you're going to do it.
Mark, it's a good point. It's funny because I get asked a lot because I've had a few companies and they've all worked, but I've never had any trouble raising money. It's always been incredibly fast. And believe it or not, it's usually without a business plan. And there might be a little write-up, just kind of some major points and why I think it'll work, but there's never been a business plan, never been projections on numbers, anything like that. And, I think in part, and I don't want to blow my own horn on this too much, but I think there's something about if you really believe in it, I don't know. I haven't figured out why it's been so easy for me. Obviously, when you get a little bit of a track record, it gets easier. But I just know for me, it's always been very, very easy.
I guess people they must know your reputation, and they know you must have had because working on this, I presume all those companies were in the same domain, and you have a really good insight from creating things, what works, what doesn't work, and there's tons of different ideas that pop up when you create your own company and think, oh, maybe I should sell more of this, or don't know.
Yeah, I mean, now, yes, I think that now if I were to start another company, I'm just guessing that, raising money would not be an issue as well. In fact, I'm almost positive it would be an issue, especially knowing some of the people I know and whatnot. But I think, well, actually kind of a fun story. So I got asked to go to this, they call it a pitch fest, which is basically where these teams go and they pitch their ideas, right? And I think this might have been associated with the University of Colorado. They had some MBA program or something. And so I got invited to go. They wanted me to go and listen to this thing. And it was kind of a little bit of a fancy thing. And I remember sitting there and listening to these groups pitch their things. And it was so polished and so professional and so amazing. I remember sitting there going, like literally, my insecure side is going literally, oh my God, I could never do that. That's just unbelievable. Then it started dawning. It's like, dude, you've done that many times. You just haven't done it like that, right? So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm just glad that I've never had to struggle with raising money, because honestly, I see companies that it seems like it's almost a full-time job for them trying to raise money, and that would kill me. Because, for me, it's all about momentum and moving, going fast. And if I had to spend all my time raising money, I don't know whether I would do it.
Why also did you want to raise money? I know we've talked about it in the previous episodes with Ringo about the CLT Toolbox, which should be published by the time this episode is published. And obviously, we're adopting more the approach of bootstrapping. So no investments, may take longer, but you're not tied to anybody else or any other firms or parties. Uh, was it a thing at the time, or it was like standard? If you want to grow something, you just raise money.
The first thing comes to mind is that I didn't at the time have a lot of money, and my net worth was pretty tiny. I mean, oh my gosh, I think at CADZUX, I think I paid myself, which I've done consistently. I just don't take a lot of money out of the company because for me, that money represents runway, and I want as much runway as possible. I want to get this thing to where it's self-sustaining. So, typically I didn't pay myself very much. And I think with Sketchup, I think our CFO would verify this, but I don't think I got paid for the first 2 or 3 years, if I'm right. I forget. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Which is crazy.
So there was a couple reasons. One of them is that if you raise, I'll call it smart money, it's actually nice to have those connections. The connections and the input can be very, very valuable. And when I took money from, this guy Raleigh and from Claire and Brian, I knew I gave up more of the company than most people ever would in that initial round, if you will, or I don't know if you call it a round, but intuitively, I knew that I would never mess around with raising money again. And that was absolutely right. So, again, it's about momentum and movement. And for me, that's a really important thing. So I would say it's a combination of things. Is number one, not having deep pockets myself at the time. But also, there's an element too of trying to take some of the pressure off yourself, because if you're using your own resources, there's even more pressure on yourself. Not to say that there's not pressure on yourself regardless, but no, yeah, those would be some of the reasons why I took money.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
So you raised money and you created that new company that was called,
called the company. We had a naming session. We called it, I actually thought of the name and I didn't like it. It was called At Last Software. I kind of got overruled on the name. I really didn't like it, but that's what we called the company. And, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. And, and then, it's funny. We had a naming session for trying to figure out what we're going to call the product. And Joe and I just, I forget at the time, everything was sort of the hot thing. This is back in like 99. We called it, our prototype, we just called it E-Sketch, which again, we knew wasn't going to be the permanent name, but we knew we needed something different. It was kind of funny, Mark, because we did this naming session at my house because we didn't have an office at the time. And we had a guy come in to help us with it. And all the names were just, in my opinion, ridiculous, right? And we settled, and he, the consultant guy, settled on a name that I really thought was ridiculous. Anyway, my brother, Coop, is over that night at the house. And remember in the kitchen, and I told him about, we spent the whole day doing this naming thing. And, this is what we came up with. And I was just, crying about the whole experience. He literally goes, well, I would just call it SketchUp, like sketch that thing up. And I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant.
Perfect.
Perfect. So we got we checked and, we could get the name and everything. And that was it. I still like the name. Some people think it's dumb, but I still like it.
I've always known it. So I think it's great. It's a great name.
Seems to work. Yeah.
So then that, when was it exactly? What was the date of?
What happened was, Claire, Brian, and Raleigh put in that money. I want to say, it would have been in the fall of 99. And so Joe and I dove in and started building the prototype. And the whole idea was just to have enough cash so that essentially we could get Joe down the road. We thought 6 months to build this prototype. Because I'm a big fan of building prototypes for two reasons. One is it lets you actually interact with it, because you can have this idea and put it all on paper, but until you can actually kind of interact with it and get a sense of how this thing behaves, it's kind of hard to know exactly. I mean, and honestly, I consider myself a focus group of one. And it, to digress for a moment, I think has really been a strength for me because I have walked the walk so many times, in my consulting work and stuff. I've done those things where you're up at 3 a.m. trying to get a release out and the damn plotter doesn't work in those days, or, you get a bug or something in the software that's all, so I've walked the walk. I know what people are up against. And to me, knowing your struggles of your customer, knowing what they want, not even what they want, just knowing what resonates with you is incredibly important and valuable, right? So anyway, I forgot my train when I'm on a tangent there. But what were we talking about, Mark?
Sketchup. Sketch it up.
Yeah,
No,
yes. So what happened was
did you grow a team straight away?
no. So what happened was the idea was to build this prototype. That's where I was going. Sorry. The idea was to build this prototype, and we thought it would take 6 months. And we dove in, and this just shows you how talented Joe is. I mean, the guy is just brilliant. And he wrote the modeling engine, everything. And the thing was so small. It was unbelievable. And we did this prototype, Joe did most of the heavy lifting. But it was this constant back and forth every day. He's working from his house. I'm working from my house. And, I'd get an email and it'd be a new release, if you will, right? And I'd immediately be playing with it. And it was just, for both of us still talk about how it was probably, in terms of my, if you will, professional life or whatever, it was probably some of the most enjoyable 6 weeks of my life, because this thing that I've been dreaming about for a long, long time was coming to life. And keep in mind, this is not polished at all. I mean, there's no undo. It's rough. It crashes all the time. But we created a thread through the process. So you could draw a line and it would, fill it in, and you could pull it up. And so it's actually amazing at how the result of that first 6 weeks, how much it looks like SketchUp today. That lineage has not been broken in all these years. So I remember being over at Joe's house, and we were looking at kind of one of the last, call it, revolutions of the thing that he had created, or we had created. And I remember telling Joe, I said, Joe, I have no idea whether we're going to make money at this, but this thing is amazing. It is amazing. And he's like, really? I go, yeah, it's incredible. And yeah, so what happened was, my friend Raleigh had kind of forgotten about.
That was in 1999, wasn't it?
This was in 99. And
I was still in primary school.
Oh, were you really? Oh my gosh. That makes me feel old, Mark.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I was pretty young then. I was 39. I was born in 1960. So I was 39. I mean, this is kind of a fun story too. Just I'll condense it. But so Raleigh was in town, and I asked him. I said, "Hey, do you want to see this thing we're working on?" He's like, "Yeah." So he comes over, and I think we were at Joe's house when we did this, because I wanted Joe to see this. And I started off and I fired up AutoCAD, and I drew kind of what looks like a doghouse, just kind of a simple rectangle with a pitched roof on it. And I'm talking through, okay, I'm going 0, 0, 10. Then I'm going, 0, 0, I'm drawing this thing. And I don't know how long it took me. Maybe it took 20 minutes or something. And I'm talking them through every stage. Now I'm going up, so I'm using the right-hand rule, and blah, 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 blah. And he's kind of falling asleep watching this. And I said, okay, well, now let's try that in this new thing. And I drew out a rectangle, pulled it up, drew a line, pulled the ridge. And he's like, He's just like dead
What?
silent. He goes, what? You know, he just couldn't believe it. He goes, do that again. I go, okay, well, okay, let's make it longer. Let's add a bump out. Let's put another roof. You know, and he was just like, you've got to be kidding me. And he goes, so what is this AutoCAD thing? I go, what's the most popular design program in the world right now? Most popular CAD system. He's like, oh my God, why didn't you tell me this? This is amazing, right? Well, that led to him putting together, at the time, I think he was based in Dallas. He had a home in Boulder as well. And he goes, why don't you come down to Dallas? I'll put together some of my buddies and let's just see what the reaction is and see what the environment's going to be like to raise money. And so the intent of the trip was not to raise money. It was just to kind of go down and do a little test run and see how people reacted to it. So, you know, I wheel into this conference room and there's like, maybe eight guys are in this room. And, you know, again, just being very honest, I'm not going to try to hide anything. I just said, you know, here's a little about my background. Here's what we're doing. Here's this thing. And I basically gave the same demo that I gave, you know, built this little thing and I get done with that. And this is where the story gets so fun because this guy says, hey, could I try it? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, this guy's just going to bomb. I mean, he just watched a 15-minute demo. I mean, he's just going to totally bomb, right? And the software was so crude. So I, you know, start a new session, give him the mouse, and I turn around and the guys are asking me questions. And I think literally like another 15, 20 minutes goes by and I turn around, Mark, and I cannot believe what's on the screen. This guy had modeled like this custom home. And I don't mean just a box with a roof. I mean like it's going on, right? And he's working on, of all things, he's working on how to make a train model in the backyard. And I was just completely floored. I couldn't believe it. And, you know, before I could say a word, thank goodness, he basically says, I have dreamed of this my entire career. I have spent, he goes, the amount of money I've spent on this, you know, damn software these big companies sell us is unbelievable. The amount of money I've spent on training is unbelievable with hardly any results. He just went off complaining about all the complaints that, you know, a lot of people had. He said, I am not leaving here without a copy of this thing. This thing is a game changer. And
why do you think companies like Autodesk didn't get to creating anything like this? Is that because they didn't have the time? Does that take a lot of time? You said
no,
didn't take that much time.
they have
Why
the
is that?
time and they have the resources. And you know, let's face it, the big guys have really made some neat stuff. It's a great question. It's a really great question. In fact, early on, when I'd go out showing this thing, one of the things that people would look at me and they'd go, you know, who are you with? Are you with Autodesk? No. Wait, who made this? You know, it actually, in some ways, I think it actually hurt us because they were like, what? So, you know, something's not right here.
You've stolen something.
But you know, Mark, my impression of it now, I shouldn't say this is the case now, but at the time, a lot of these big companies, their attitude is they would just they just watch the market and they're looking for those innovative things that pop up and they would rather go acquire them than to try and cook them up and build them themselves. That honestly was kind of the attitude back then. And my apologies to any of you big guys out there. Maybe that's wrong, but that's the way I saw it, is that they would rather all these startup people that are planting seeds, they would just as soon watch and see which ones sprout and take off and then go buy them is sort of my impression. I could do a whole interview on some of the challenges of big companies and startups and things like that. It's actually a fascinating topic to me, having kind of been in that world for a while. But it really can be hard to have ideas percolate up through a company. And one of the things that can be challenging, and this might be showing my own insecurities, is that one of the things we did really great with our culture is we had a very, very, I'll call it open, human culture. And in other words, everybody could just be themselves. I mean, all the flaws, all the great things, all the funny things, we were really fun, playful, crazy bunch of, misfits. But
I'll get back to this because I've got specific questions about it. But yeah, I'm really interested in this side of thing, the management. But first of all, how fast and when did you start thinking of growing a team or growing SketchUp and commercializing it as well, because you were just showing demos at the time?
Yeah, good question. So what happened was we, by the way, after that meeting down in Dallas, one of the guys in the room asked me what my valuation was. I looked over at Rawls and his face was just screaming, "Don't screw this up. Don't screw this up." And I gave a really high valuation and, immediately, this is my recollection. It might've been, over the course of that day, but I think literally by the end of the day or the next day, we had commitments for like many millions of dollars, which we didn't need. So we ended up taking much less than that. And we're off to the races. It was a fishing trip and it ended up being that we landed plenty of fish on that trip, right? So what happened then is, and then this always happens, then you're like back home going, oh God, now we got to do it. So what happened was Joe and I had worked with this guy named John Ulmer, who's another just amazingly talented programmer. And John was our first hire. And then we hired another really talented programmer, Susan Wellard. And so the first year, I think there wasn't a lot of us. I want to say could be wrong, 6 of us or something, maybe 7. And it's amazing how long it takes to actually build product, even with a small, lean, very talented team. So essentially, by the time you do write all the code, debug, write documentation, yada, yada, I think we would have, if you will, started in earnest on the product in early 2000. And I think it was that fall that we released the first official release. And we went to some kind of trade show. It might have been, I think back then they had a thing called AEC Systems or something, I forget, or some AIA conference or something, I forget what it was, but we went, and of course we were so cheap and poor, we had like a booth we wouldn't even rent a table or something. We were so bad. We had I remember we go to shows and have our little banner hung up with a telephone cord. We didn't have a string or something. I mean, it was definitely not very polished, but I remember showing the product to some people in the press, might have been Ed Goldberg or something. And you could tell they were like, whoa. And we won Best of Show for the first show we went to. And yeah, and I'll be honest, things did not come out of the gun gangbusters at all. I mean, it was the early days were really tough. I mean, geez, I remember when we started in earnest trying to sell the product, I remember we had a month where we sold 5 copies. But the downloads were happening. And so what we would do is we try to follow up and call people that had downloaded and basically say, hey, can we answer any questions, blah, blah, blah. And then the downloads started accelerating to the point where we really couldn't keep up with that. But, I got to be honest, Mark, there was actually a point where I was worried because, like we might sell 5 seats one month and maybe the next we'd sell 6. I mean, we're not killing it here, right? Because the product was $4.95 by design, because, we started the company. Joe said, basically, I'm just going to focus on the technical side. You do whatever you want on the business side. And so from all those experiences and working for bigger companies and my other experiences, I knew that I wanted to have, there were several things that I wanted to do in the company. And one of them was, I really wanted our customers to love the product. I wanted them to buy the product because it really resonated with them. So we did a fully functioning free download. And, it's kind of funny. I don't want to say we were on the cutting edge, because that would be ridiculous, but we were towards the front edge of some of these concepts, right? Like where you download the software and you buy it and you get an authorization code. That was not common. In fact, it was so uncommon that people would say, well, where's my box? And we literally, true story, we had to make a box that we would ship people that had a little piece of paper with their authorization code and nothing else. That's how different it was back then, right? Or they would say, well, where's my documentation? I said, well, it's right here. It's a PDF. Just print it out. They go, what? So this, again, I don't want to sound like we were the pioneers in this stuff, but we were certainly early adopters of this new way of distributing and selling software.
I've just listened to a podcast about Steam. I'm not a big Steam user, but and it's exactly the same that happened. And people were saying, were really confused on how, because it was just about the time when people could buy physical goods online. So it was really weird to say, okay, so any non-physical goods, digital goods, could be bought also online. Was like mind-blowing. People couldn't get it.
Right.
At the time. So yeah, and I can't remember when Steam actually was created or came to market, but it must have been about the same time.
Yeah, for me, there was other things too that we did that, since I'm telling the story, I thought they were incredibly important. and not to sell myself short, but I actually think they turned out to be incredibly important and really part of our brand and our culture, if you will, because we had this incredibly honest, open relationship with our customers, which is sort of how we were internally. And that was really important to me. All this was based upon simply, how would I want to be treated? And so another big thing was we had free support. I butted heads with, I didn't butt heads, but, people on our team were just shocked by this, as were, some of the people on our board. You can't have free support. And I said, well, let me tell you, there is nothing worse than spending money on a piece of software and you get stuck and you call up their support line and they say, well, for, $200 a quarter, we'll answer that question, or whatever the answer is, right? Nothing will send you through the roof more than that. And so I said, no, we're going to have free support. Look at it as marketing if you want. And that turned out to be huge. And
everybody does it now. I don't know any company that does payable support.
Yeah. I mean, you got to keep in mind that at the time, Mark, I think one of the cheapest CAD programs was like, well, AutoCAD, I think, was $3,500 or $4,000. So, again, my goal was to make 3D accessible. So, we purposely priced the product at $4.95. I wanted it to be such that almost anybody could afford that. And a firm would have a hard time not if it took off, not having everybody own a copy. That was the whole goal. And, and so we did have an authorization code, but it was very easily hacked and it was shared by everybody. And again, drove my team absolutely bonkers because we could have clamped down on that. I said, no, guys, it's fine. It's seats. And those people will convert because it's too easy to buy. They will convert. And that turned out to be the case as well. But
do you think this, I'm really interested in this because we're building something online at the moment. It's coming live soon. Where we're wondering whether freemiums are very important as well to get known, and you have to offer a free version for a certain amount of time and stuff like this. But what I'm wondering for Sketchup was, do you think the easy accessibility and affordability of Sketchup made it success?
Yes, I think that certainly helped. But, also, and I am going to blow our horn a little bit, there was nothing like it on the market. There was just nothing like it. And, one of our goals with the product is we wanted people to open it up, fire it up, and within 5 or 10 minutes have success. And that success could be, I drew a box. Success could be, I drew a box and pulled it up. That was success. It's like, wow. Because honestly, if you opened almost any CAD program at the time, it was really hard to have success within the first 5 to 10 minutes. So that was a big important thing to us. And we did that, with our videos and things like that. But for me, again, Mark, I really wanted to have, again, as a user, a person that had walked that walk so much, I wanted to make sure that our users, that it really worked for them. So that was part of the free download thing. So to put it in perspective, we at one point, this debate about how many illegal copies to legal was raging in our company. So I had a lot of conversations with our programmers about this. So we put what's called a phone home feature in SketchUp. So basically, if the person was using it and they were online, all it would do is send a thing back to our server saying, hey, I'm being used in Russia. Hey, I'm being used in France. Hey, I'm being used in Vietnam, whatever. That was all that it said. And it would also give the serial number, if you will, the authorization code. So what do you think the ratio of legal seats to illegal seats was?
The exact figure, but I heard about it in another podcast that you did.
Yeah, it was for every legal one, there was 1,000 copies.
Crazy.
Legal. And I loved it.
And which countries? Was there any country that stood out?
That's a great.
Oh, it's just all across the world.
So let me back up and also say this. This was kind of fun. Again, I thought it was great. So when you write software, I don't know if that's the way they do it now, but back then you have what's called a DLL, a dynamic link library, which is where the software literally says, hey, I'm going to ask the user to draw a line, or something, or click the start point. I'm making this up. Well, that prompt would be in this file. So it said, oversimplified, put prompt A here. So what happened is these hackers went in and they translated our software we were in something like 12 languages within months, because they knew the software wasn't going to do, people in Russia or China or Germany or whatever any good if they couldn't understand the prompt. So we got translated into these different languages very, very quickly. We didn't do anything. But I remember, we had, it was a ton of users in China and Russia, and all over the world, which was so cool. To me, it was cool.
Well, yeah, knowing that your tool is used everywhere, not just in your country is
and
amazing.
I knew that was going to result. Honestly, it was just, for $500, it was just too easy not to be legal. And that's what happened, But
how did the word spread about SketchUp? What were you able to track this?
No,
how did you get SketchUp to be known everywhere?
No idea. We might have run an ad once, but we knew that really wasn't going to work. What I literally think happened is, this is the other thing that was kind of fun, is I talked to architects that were using it a lot, and they would tell me to my face, yeah, I'm not telling a soul about this. no way in hell am I going to tell anybody about this because it gives me such an edge. I can go in and do quick conceptual design or change things with a client. It blows them away. I get the job. There's no way I'm going to tell anybody about this. So that wasn't helping us. But I think honestly what happened was there must have been some word of mouth going on, because this is another really fascinating thing that actually initially scared me to death. Was true story. One of the first people I showed it to was a guy who was back then we called him a CAD manager for a big architectural firm in Denver. Joe and I are from Boulder, and that's where the company is. And Brian was always for me, he was always a great sort of litmus test. Like I could go in and show Brian something, and he always seemed to get it right. Like, yeah, this is going to fly, or this is not. And I had Joe all pumped up. I go, Brian's just going to fall out of his chair when he sees this thing, right? So we go in, meet with Brian, and I give him a demo, and he's kind of quiet. And he goes, can you take a shape and extrude it along a tapering helix? And I was like, oh, no. And I said, no way. And what he was doing is he was just looking at the features. Because, one of the things that initially hurt us is there's just very few tools. It almost looks like a toy. Like, what can you do with that? Well, that's the whole challenge in software, in my opinion. The challenge is less is more. How do you absolutely simplify it? Whereas he was looking at it like these crazy features that you can do in, at the time in Form Z or Max or whatever, right? So, and that turned out to be very indicative of the challenge we were going to face, because these, call them IT managers, CAD managers, whatever you want to call them in these big architectural firms, or almost any architectural firms, they were kind of the gatekeeper to technology. So what happened, Mark, was we could not get by the gatekeepers. They were like, this is just some toy. We use fancy pants stuff. I'm not going to bring this into our firm. So what happened was, thank goodness, is people in the firm heard about it and they started downloading it. And in many cases, the owner of the firm or the partners were downloading it and using it. This is, a true story. I can't tell you how many times I would talk to, especially in some of the really big firms. I'd be talking to their CAD managers, like, no, we're not. I go, well, geez, you've had 500 downloads in your firm. No, we're not going to buy it. No. And then inevitably I'd get the call. Yeah, we want a site license for everybody. Because the guy that owns the firm says, why the hell don't we have this thing? I use it daily, right? And that's the kind of thing that happened. Is it sort of seeped up from the bottom? And that honestly is exactly what I wanted. I wanted it to resonate with people and to work. And I'd rather have, honestly, true story, I'd rather have the company fail than have a marketing play. And thank goodness it turned out that way.
Great. So how long did it get bought by Google at some point? How long did it take to raise interest? And how does that happen?
That was sort of fun how that happened as well, because let's see. What happened is Google Earth came on the scene, and as I know the story, we all thought Google Earth was amazing. We just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Well, a lot of our programmers were at a show, some trade show, and come to find out some of the Google Earth team was there. My apologies to John Hanking and the Google team if this is stated wrong. This is how I remember it. And those guys basically started, they got together and they're like, oh man, we think Google Earth is a bomb. We want to get SketchUp models in there. And they were like, well, we're trying to do the same thing. And I think what happened, John and I laugh about this later, because I think what happened is they were actually swapping some code or some, like, okay, guys, try this command now. Like they would put it into a bill and I'm making this up, but I think it's close to the truth. Only our guys knew about it or something. Well, anyway, so somehow both sides figured out this hack to get models in, which we just thought was the neatest thing in the world. Built, put a house or a building on that site in Google Earth. Well, what happened was, I won't tell the story, but it's actually really hilarious. John happened to be in town and was in the office. I didn't even know he was in the office. So John Hankey and Michael were the heads of what was called Geo at Google. Both of them amazing guys. Unfortunately, we lost Michael. John went on, by the way, to make this thing called is it Pokemon Go or something?
Pokemon Go, yeah.
Yeah, which is, I think, one of the most successful games ever created. John's a total serial entrepreneur, incredible creative guy. But at any rate, there was a chance meeting where John was in the office, and I went off on in this meeting. I was sitting there with kind of like a fly on the wall, and then I just went off on this idea of what we could do together, which was, my gosh, Google's about organizing and making the world's information accessible. I go, my God, let's do that for 3D. And I literally making this up on the fly. I go, we could make a 3D warehouse where everybody can put their 3D content. So we don't all have to keep reproducing the same damn stuff. And manufacturers can put all their content in there, window makers, manufacturers, furniture, everything, whatever, trees, people. And I said, and we'll make a free version. And John basically stood up and high-fived me or something. And, I was like, well, that was fun. And probably never hear from him again. And a couple of weeks later, he called me and told me that he was going to be this is like a Thursday. And he said, I'm going to be in Boulder tomorrow. And he goes, no, he didn't say he was going to be in Boulder. He said, could we get together tomorrow? I said, gosh, John, I don't know. Let me see if I can get a ticket, And he's like, no, I'm going to be in Boulder tomorrow. I go, why are you going to be in Boulder? He goes, to meet with you. So we got up early and went and had a coffee. He said, well, I came here because I wanted to look you in the eye, or have you look me in the eye and tell me that everything you said in that meeting we're going to make happen. And I said, amen, hallelujah, let's do it. So that led us going down the path of, the deal that we both thought made sense is going down the path of we were going to be Google's exclusive modeler, whatever that meant. Basically, Google was going to take us under their wing, and we were going to be their modeling app with the idea that the world was going to help populate Google Earth with all this neat content and so forth, amongst other things. And so I knew our conversion rate on downloads. The whole time this is going on, and I'm kind of working out the details of this deal, which was in the late fall of 2005. I think it's the late fall of 2005. The whole time I'm doing this, I'm thinking, man, I have a feeling we were going to hire like 30 some people that fall. And I convinced our board to put the brakes on that because, I just had this sense that Google's going to change their mind and want to acquire us, because if they do this deal, our sales and our valuation is going to go through the roof. Because our smallest year of growth was 100%. We were on fire.
Sorry,
yeah.
How many offices and how much staff did you have at the time?
So we had, I want to say we had 70. There were 70 of us, and we had a presence in Germany. We had a presence in London. Yeah. So I think, don't hold me to that, but I think it was like 70 people. And sure enough, I was walking home one night and get a call on my phone, and it was one of the guys that I was kind of trying to put this deal together with Google. And at the time, and I don't know if it's the case now, it probably is, Google's just such a wonderful company. I mean, just open and generous and fun. And Stephen calls and says, hey, Brad, we've been thinking about this. And we were wondering, would you ever be interested in acquisition? And I just said, no hesitation. It'd be an honor. Culturally, the fit is just fantastic because, it's so important. I knew it's just so important for your team and for your customers to if you're going to get acquired, you want to get acquired by somebody who really gets it, and Google gets it. And so what was really fun about that is usually, that kind of starts a process, and then, then you start talking numbers, and there's, all this due diligence, yada, yada. Stephen right then goes, well, here's what we want to offer you. And of course, the number just blew me away. Yeah, it just blew me away. So what happened then, which was kind of weird, I still don't understand this, I'm being totally truthful when I say this, is again, I don't understand how this happened, but all of a sudden, all these big players started coming out of the woodwork that started wanting us. Not started kind of a bidding war. And the number went up quite a bit, which, don't go thinking this is like it is these days. I mean, geez, these days, you're talking massive numbers, right? But for us, thank goodness, thank goodness the needle landed on Google, and we put that deal together because it was the perfect fit, the perfect outcome. And wow, talk about if you want to introduce the world to 3D, holy mackerel, there's not a better launch pad. Yeah, it was.
Did you all just move everything to Google, and you worked there? How did that go after?
What we did is we all wanted to stay in Boulder. It's one of the first things I asked the Google team, and it wasn't even a no-brainer. Like, oh, heck yeah. They were so great. They were just wonderful. They came in and did this. They told us to take like a 3-day weekend after the deal was closed, and they came in and did this extreme makeover on our space. Of course, the thing is, we're all food motivated. We're all cyclists and stuff. We show up, we come back, and we're just looking at this wall of food. All these treats and coolers with all these drinks. I remember we're all just staring at it, and somebody's like, Schell, my last name is Schell. Schell, can we eat this stuff? I'm like, I think so. Like the first morning, all we did was forage on this new wall of food that was in our place. But no, it was great. And, they are such, I just have nothing but good things to say about them. I remember early on, we were in a meeting with all the higher ups because I was out there in, at the Googleplex working on next steps and stuff like that. And we're in this meeting, and I'd been thinking about it a lot, and it dawned on me that like half of our company was focused on what I would, getting money, for lack of a better term. That's not really much of a finance term, but I'll just call it getting money. So that is sales, processing, all that other stuff, accounting, blah, blah, blah. And it dawned on me like, man, now that we're a part of Google, this is, our revenue probably wouldn't cover the cafeteria bill for a month, if that. Maybe a week, right? So I got this idea, well, geez, shouldn't we just make it free? And I was in this meeting, and we hadn't closed the deal yet. And I brought this up, and I forget who it was. It might have been John or some higher up said, and everyone's dead quiet. Somebody says, wait a minute, we're going to pay you X amount of millions, and you want to give away the product? And we haven't even closed the deal yet. And I was like, oh no, this might have been a mistake.
Oops.
Whoops, ruh-roh. And then everybody just starts busting up. And they're like, of course. They say, they pointed at John or something and said it took John 2 years to figure that out. But, it's like, and that's the thing I just thought was so beautiful about the team there is, they get it. It's like they said to me, Brett, we don't know your space. We bought you because you do cool stuff and you're innovative, basically, literally, do whatever you want. So
you stayed there for a few years then to carry on doing the good work.
You know what happened? And in fact, I was just talking to a friend the other day about this. What happened with me was I really started feeling burnout after about a year. And I'd always told our team, hey, if you're struggling with something, hey, just let's talk about it, right? And even to the point of we'll help you transition out or whatever. The whole point was, you really want people to be there because it's turning them on and they're excited about the work. And if not, hey, let's help you change. And what dawned on me is I realized that I was just really feeling burnout. And some of that could have been because I'm working for a company now. And even though I had a lot of freedom, I don't know, I can't figure myself out that way. But it just dawned on me like, you know what, there's other people in our company. It's their time. It's their time it's time for me to get out of the way. And so I left. Yeah, so I left. And there are times that I definitely regret it because the things that you get exposed to, the experiences you have are pretty incredible. Yeah, pretty incredible.
I heard also a lot of founders who were getting bought, they were feeling that they were letting down their staff. But maybe not so much with you because you knew Google were great. So they were in good hands.
The impression I got was they were in great hands. And I said this in another interview that I did, but it actually was really fun for me to hear this. On paper, and I'm not trying to throw our group under the bus, but on paper, a lot of us were not Google caliber whatsoever. I mean, you just can't believe the profile of a lot of people that work at Google. I mean, just incredible educations, incredibly musical, speak multiple languages, adventurous. I mean, it just, you can feel about that tall when you're hanging out with these people. But one day I get a call from the head of HR. I'd actually read an article about her. I never talked to her. And basically the conversation was so fun because she calls me up, totally straight face. She goes, Brad, you would never get a job here. And I was like, hallelujah. I wouldn't even get in the door. And, and she said, we're both laughing about it, and she said something like, and honestly, most of your team wouldn't get a job here either. Yet they have turned out to be just amazing. In fact, what happened was there's internal opportunities at Google. And so, like Bruce went and I think he went and ran their Australian office, and Mike went to Benelux, and Chris went to Britain. It's like, because all these opportunities are there. So they, basically just saying, I talked to all the higher ups here, and we want to know, how do we reproduce that? How do we do that? And I told her, I said, I don't know. I don't know if there's a formula.
On the other hand, it's quite positive to know that you don't need to be amazing to create a great thing,
Yes,
you don't need to be super educated to do an amazing tool. You can build very simple tools that it's not necessarily nobody's thought about it, but nobody's taken the time to do them. And it's actually very simple. And you can, you don't have to be the Einstein or to do a great thing, which I think is quite positive.
Mark, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I think that one of the things that played, my personal belief is one thing that helped fuel that creativity and basically these, this small group of misfits in Boulder, to be honest, kind of changing things a bit, was because our culture you could be so open. There was nothing that wasn't fair game. good, bad, whatever. And so if you can allow people to really be themselves and to share anything, the creative stuff that happens and how people can self-motivate it's inspiring. And I think honestly that plays a role in it. But the other thing too is, I mean, look at myself. I'm not a tech guy. I just have ideas. And this is the other thing I say to a lot of people that are thinking about starting a company or something. The hardest thing about starting a company is starting. 0.999% of people will never pull the trigger because they've been programmed to think, they're scared. They're worried about their finances. There's all these reasons why. And, the only thing I would have to say is there's nothing to be afraid of. It's much worse to not pull the trigger than it is to, because a lot of those fears are really in your head, in my opinion.
I mean, it's the thing we entrepreneurs keep saying, isn't it? Where you have to start and not being scared of failing. So I aim to say this because everybody says it, and it's the message everybody wants to give. Yeah. It may also be very cultural. I know French people are very are not as adventurous as the Americans. That's what I keep hearing from French people, French entrepreneurs. Is the fear of failing, and therefore you don't overtest and you don't iterate on your failures and just adapt things. But obviously you need to maybe have the time and the money to do that sometimes. I don't know. But I agree with you. I agree.
I think that my experience, if you have a decent idea and you're okay about, and you can talk about it and convey that idea, and you have genuine excitement around it, it's generally not very hard to raise some money to at least take it far enough that you can see, do I have something here? And so it's not like you have to use all of your own money or whatnot to get something off the ground. But I personally, I would highly encourage it. Like personally, the experiences I've had doing these things, the people I've met, just the experiences are just been incredible. And, the joy of seeing your team just on fire and what, the things you're doing. And it's just a riot. I'm not going to say it's all joy. Trust me, there's downers and, there's times you're thinking the thing's going to fail. But even that in a crazy way is fun too. It's because it's your own journey. It's your own ship. You're steering the boat, and it's a blast.
Yeah. Very quickly, what did you do after Google then? Did you create another company? Where did you go? Did you still get involved, like with some light touch?
No. What happened with me? What happened?
I'm sorry, when was it that you left?
I can't remember if I left. So we closed our deal, I think it was in the spring of 2006, because I remember negotiating the deal at the end of 2005. Like, I think I literally signed the letter of intent with Google Christmas Eve or something like that. And I think we closed a few months later.
2006 on the Wikipedia.
Is that what it says? Okay, I believe that.
Yeah. March 14th.
And I think I left about a year later. And it was interesting. And there, like I said, there have been times that I doubted this, but for me, I sort of thought to myself, gosh, Brad, you have been so fortunate. You've had all these wonderful experiences. You've had a few companies, they've all worked. You don't have a massive amount of money, but if you don't screw up, you've got enough to get you where you need to be. And I kind of thought, what else am I going to experience if I start another company? And I kind of thought, maybe I should see what else is out there and see what else there is to experience. So right or wrong, that's what I did. And I'm way into water sports, with wind, like windsurfing, kiting, kite foiling, wing foiling now. I'm a wannabe surfer, although I'm terrible.
How old are you, if you don't mind me
I'm
asking?
64 now. Yeah. So I got turned on to a place called Hood River, Oregon, which is just paradise. It's kind of one of the wind meccas of the United States, that in Maui and Mexico, which is where I'm at right now, sitting actually by the ocean. So I got way into that, and I bought a little place in Hood River and spend time out there playing on the water. But it's paradise. It's just a natural playground. I've just done a bunch of random things. I spent a winter in Guatemala trying to learn Spanish, which has been one of the hardest things I've done. I built a wind farm in Oregon, which was a really interesting experience. I should say, I'm majority owner of that project and was fairly involved in that. I've invested in a lot of private deals. I've done real estate projects, building a house now. I don't know. It's just funny how you can fill up your life with stuff.
Overfill it as well sometimes.
Yeah, it's just amazing. In fact, I've often joked like I need to get a job so I can relax a little bit. But no, it's been good. I mean, for me, I kind of look at life as experiences, and I've been really fortunate to have some wonderful experiences on the business side of things, and another reason, Mark, that the reason that I probably haven't pulled the trigger on another company, and that's not saying I would, but when I do, unfortunately, my personality is I go in pretty deep company, and part of that is because I feel an obligation to the investors and myself. I feel an obligation to everybody, so it's hard for me to dabble in it. Like, I can just go in really deep. My balance can get really bad. Which is when we started Sketchup, I told Joe that I was going to go away every summer and be in Hood River. And he's like, fine, I don't care. And I did that every summer. And every spring when I left, I felt terrible. And then about an hour down the road, I felt great because I would drive out there. And honestly, for me, it was an incredible example of being away from the office for a summer. I still worked a lot, but being away and doing something I loved just completely changed my whole mindset, my enthusiasm. And, there were things that we patented that I cooked up being away. And so, anyway, kind of rambling right now, but that's sort of why I stepped away from it, because if I could do it without having to be so immersed in it, yeah, I'd probably do it in a heartbeat.
Are you still involved in anything SketchUp related? Not completely. No. Or are you still do conferences or anything like this? Or
I haven't really.
Jumbo?
Sometimes I question why I haven't done that. I know SketchUp has this thing that we started called 3D Basecamp. I had some obligations. I couldn't go this year, but I've decided I'm going to go to the next one. I think that'd be really fun to go back. I started dabbling with AI, and I'm just blown away with what I'm seeing in AI. I swore, actually, true story, I swore that I wasn't going to start another company until if I could figure out a way how to get the modeling out of the way and more interact with the software in a way that was like guiding it, being the, leading the orchestra to design, I would jump back in. But AI is that solution. And I think we're going to see some amazing things happen with AI and design and modeling. I've already seen some prototypes from some companies that are just amazing.
Yeah, I completely agree. On that topic, it's until 2024, there was obviously OpenAI tools and everything that followed with it. But now we're seeing so much more, and there's a lot of I've watched so many videos about AI agents, and it's crazy how much you can do with AI agents and automation tools.
I am just starting to dabble in it, and I got to be honest, it's fascinating, it's unbelievable, and it's also a little scary. I mean, this is just kind of the beginnings of it. I just hope we all use it in a positive way, because it's powerful stuff, amazing stuff.
Great. It's been amazing. Thank you very much, Brad. And I was going to say, maybe you can finish with an anecdote, because I was saying how I'm very grateful that you replied very quickly to my request, my query, and said, do you want to be on the podcast? And you said yes, very nicely. And I was also surprised that I didn't know your name before. I had to Google who's the founder of Sketchup, and found Brad Chen. And is it something similar that happened to that? Is that lady on the plane? Maybe you can say that anecdote.
Yeah, I have to say, as a founder, you tend to get more credit than you should. Yeah, I mean, I had, like if we look at the notes that I cooked up years ago, it's amazing how everything there has been captured exactly. And so for that, that is incredibly rewarding for me, to have an idea that resonated with so many people. But I have to be very, very careful and point out the obvious, which is the crew that was with us, the things they did to fill in around that, and honestly, to enhance those concepts. Man, the credit needs to go there. Just an amazing group of people in all fronts, whether they were writing code or doing support or whatever. So I just have to be very careful to say that
Just you, basically.
It's not just me, and so I can't get all the credit. But it was very, very satisfying. It was just a very fun ride, and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but something specific, Mark, that. Oh yes, I'm sorry. You were asking about
anecdote.
So this is also very true for me. Like I feel kind of like I launched the baby. Like I remember I came back from Guatemala, and I remember I was sitting one night, I couldn't sleep, and almost on autopilot, I just went into the forum and I was looking at what people were doing. And I remember sitting there going, this is, I'm telling the truth when I say this, I'm looking at some of these models going, this is unbelievable. And I literally had this thought, like, whoever the guys are that made this thing, the crew that made this thing, they just absolutely nailed it. And then I'm like, you dummy, you did it. I mean, you guys did it. That's how much I had kind of disassociated from it, right? Because I sort of feel like, to some degree, I threw the match in the gasoline, and it just took on a life of its own. So, sometimes I probably feel more separated from it than maybe I give myself credit for. But yes, so I told you that story when we first chatted about, this has happened to me a handful of times, and it's pretty fun. I was doing an international flight that, boarded like 10 o'clock, and it was one of those flights that had like 2 seats by the window and then a bunch of seats and then 2 more seats. And I was on the aisle seat, and I was kind of hoping that it was a small person, to be honest, that was going to sit next to me, because it was a long flight. And this woman comes up and she sits down. We started chatting before dinner, and she was really fun and interesting. And I asked her, it's like, I think she was coming from New York or something. And I come to find out she lived where I was going. And I asked her what she did, and she worked for a big architectural firm, and she was leading a design team or something like this. I forget how the conversation evolved, but she basically said, she asked about me. I told her I was from Boulder, and she said something. Yeah, we use this program called Sketchup, and it's just completely changed our workflow. It's just changed everything. Like she's just really lit up about it. She goes, yeah, I think it was made in Boulder or something like that. And I'm blown away. Like, how in the world would she know that this thing is made in Boulder? I mean, the conversation kind of went like that. I'm thinking, okay, I'm not going to tell her. I'm not going to tell her. And then she said something
Which is very humble from you, because you could have
well,
just jumped on and say, "Oh,
well,
I created it."
I did buckle eventually, right? My ego just had to tell her eventually. But because she said something like, are you a SketchUp user? She said something like, do you know any of the people that? I go, oh yeah, I know a lot of them. And she said, do you use Sketchup? I go, yeah, I've been using it a long time. Any rate, I forget whether I told her or she put it together, but she was just, it was really fun for me. Like she was just on cloud nine. She couldn't believe it. So we had that. So that happened. That happens now and then. You do feel like it's good for your ego. You get a little boost on that. But like I said, I look at that as
Thank you very much again. It really shows how well you're a very humble person, very accessible. And so thank you very much. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for creating SketchUp.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
I don't think I would be here as
that's really
acoustic consultant.
It's really sweet of you to say, and also just have to say to all those Europeans, you put us on the map early on. The Europeans got behind SketchUp early on, and were just incredible, huge supporters of us. So thank you. Thank all of you.
Thank you so much, Brad.
Take care.